Okay. So, hi. And we just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening, less than 2 weeks away before the election. Yikes, right? And early voting, as we said before, starts today in Maryland. So you can go down to the early voting center with your Maryland ID, driver's license, or proof of residency, and you can actually do that today and on election day. So I'm Jill Caporale, and I am joined here today by former Maryland Attorney General Brian Frosh to talk about Maryland's upcoming election. And so I know most of you know Brian, but Brian has dedicated his career to promoting fairness, equity, and justice. He's focused on safeguarding vulnerable populations, including nursing home residents, people with disabilities, low-income families, and members of minority groups subject to abuse. He also fought federal efforts to undermine the Affordable Care Act and clean air and clean water protections. Brian was the Attorney General during Larry Hogan's tenure from 2015 to 2023, and thus has a unique insight into Hogan, his fairness, his effectiveness. And he has also worked with Angela Alsobrooks in her role as State Attorney General for Prince George's County. And just to also mention, he's not new to government. He also served in the Maryland General Assembly for 28 years. So Brian, welcome, and thank you for agreeing to meet with us.
It's my pleasure, Jill. Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for organizing
you.
it.
So we wanted to have you on since you have this unique window into both candidates. Larry Hogan was a Republican governor, Maryland, fairly blue state, as we all know, according to Pew, 55% Democratic, 31% Republican, 14 with no leaning. But he must have gotten support from non-Republicans to have won 2 terms. And Hogan says he's above party politics. As the Democratic Attorney General during his tenure, did you find this to be true?
Not even a little bit. No, he didn't get along with the General Assembly. Didn't have a working relationship with the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate. And he did something that was really extraordinary and unprecedented in terms of his relations with the General Assembly. And that is, I was elected to the House the first time in 1986. And as you say, I served for 28 years. And for all 28 years that I was in the General Assembly, the piece of paper that I looked for first on every bill that was before our committee or before us on the floor was the statement of the administration, what they thought about the bill. Now, obviously, I gave it greater weight under Paris Glendenning and William Donald Schaefer than I did under Bob Ehrlich. But it was an important piece of information. Larry Hogan came into the governor's mansion and decided he wasn't going to do that anymore. So they didn't take positions on anything. And I think that characterized his terms as governor more than anything else. Same thing happened during the Trump administration. Larry Hogan hid under his desk the entire time. He didn't want to say he was for Trump. He didn't want to say he was against Trump. But the point is, there was very little cooperation between Hogan and the General Assembly. The other thing that was extraordinary about his tenure was that the governor has 3 options when it comes to legislation that reaches his desk. He can sign it, he can veto it, or he can do nothing. And if he does nothing, the bill becomes law without his signature. And Larry Hogan set the record for not taking positions on bills that were passed by the General Assembly. He signed lots. I mean, the General Assembly passes all kinds of little stuff that is not controversial and passes without any dissenting vote. And I assume Hogan signed most of those. but he set the record. I'm sure in his first term, he exceeded by far anything that anybody else had ever done in not signing legislation. He never testified before the General Assembly in 8 years. That was unprecedented. I mean, Bob Ehrlich came before the General Assembly and testified. So did every other governor that I served with, but not Hogan. Never, not once. That's a
So,
short course on his relations with the
yeah.
General Assembly.
So there's also these several ads stating that Angela Alsobrooks cheated on her taxes. She took tax breaks she wasn't entitled to. And there's also information on Larry Hogan filtering contracts to friends and family and members enriched by his position. So, what is the electorate to believe? And what is some of your insight on this?
Well, I mean, I should turn this over to Nat Finkelstein because he's an expert on this. And but what happened with Angela Alsobrooks is she made a mistake. It was unintentional, I believe. It certainly looks like it was unintentional. Her grandmother gave her house in the District of Columbia, and her grandmother wrote the deed herself, and she just copied the lot and title numbers onto the deed from the one that she had received. But the District of Columbia had changed its system, and so when she deeded it to Angela, the District of Columbia then sent the tax bill to uh, to to her grandmother, and the grandmother, I guess they had a mortgage that Angela took over, and the mortgage company paid the tax bill every year. Angela never saw it. Well, it turned out her grandmother appropriately had taken a homeowner's tax credit, and Angela wasn't entitled to it because she wasn't living in the District of Columbia. She was living in Prince George's County. So she paid less taxes than she owed every year for 14 years until Hogan's opposition research turned it up. And in addition to that, she bought a small house, I guess, in Prince George's County. And after several years, I'm not sure how many, she bought a larger house. She took the homeowner's tax credit on the small house. When she bought the larger house, she didn't take a homeowner's tax credit. She kept the small house and rented it out. So she was taking a homeowner's tax credit on a house that she wasn't living in, but it it cost her more money than if she had switched to the larger place that she was living in. She lost money on that deal. Now, in contrast to that, Larry Hogan was a businessman, a real estate developer is how he characterized himself. He was bankrupt in the 1990s, and he got back up on his feet somehow. And when he became governor, he had 49, I think it was, companies that he had interests in that were greater than 25%. And he disclosed all those companies, but it's, the the uh, ABC LLC and the XYZ LLC can't really tell much of anything from the names. What he voted on affordable housing subsidies. The state gave out millions of dollars in affordable housing subsidies, and they awarded more subsidies on behalf of the federal government. And it turned out that the clients that were listed on Larry Hogan's business's website received over 8 years 40% of all of the affordable housing subsidies. Now, these are basically 6 companies that were competing against 60 other companies. And I think Paris Glendenning was quoted as saying something like that doesn't happen by accident. Larry Hogan, at least on 5 occasions, on the Board of Public Works, where he sits and votes, he voted for subsidies to his clients' companies. And in the most extraordinary lapse of ethics and judgment, he awarded $16 million to his stepmother. She owned a home with Larry Hogan's dad. They bought it in 1983. His dad died in 2017. In 2016, his stepmother put it into an LLC. Her name doesn't appear anywhere with respect to the records of the LLC. So nobody except for Larry Hogan would know that it belonged to her. And in 2021, he awarded it $16 million in subsidies. He says, "Oh, I did everything according to the the Ethics Commission, which is false." He said it's all made up. It's all false. And it just ain't so. I mean, he's got a serious legal problem there. He violated the ethics law, and he really ought to be held to account for it.
Wow.
Sorry, that's a very long answer to a
No,
simple
no, no,
question.
that's exactly what we want to know. And also, getting back to something else we were talking about, as part of your position as Attorney General, it was your job to protect the individuals of Maryland, right? 4 years
Yes, sure.
of yours and Hogan's governor attorney, should I call it partnership? Maybe not. Working together or not, was during the Trump years. And the AG of many states sued the federal government and you were involved, and the state of Maryland was involved in a lot of those lawsuits. So how did you do that with this contentious working with relationship with Larry Hogan?
Well, the Attorney General of Maryland did not have the power to just sue the Trump administration without permission from the governor, or without the General Assembly having passed legislation. And I think everybody knew this was going to be a problem. I didn't realize how fast it was going to arise, because in Trump's first week in office, he issued the Muslim ban executive order. And I immediately wrote to Larry Hogan and I said, "Look, this is unconstitutional. It's an incredibly stupid policy, but it's illegal and unconstitutional. Let me sue." And he said nothing. He wouldn't respond to that letter, just like he wouldn't take positions on legislation. So I turned to the General Assembly and asked them for help. They passed a bill within 2 weeks, which is extraordinary. But they passed a bill within 2 weeks giving me the authority to sue. And by the time Trump issued the second Muslim ban executive order, I was in court with 6 or 8 other attorneys general challenging it. The legislation that the General Assembly finally passed said, number one, I had to give the governor notice before I sued. I had to explain the lawsuit, explain to him why it was important to Maryland and why it was illegal. And he was required by law to respond to those letters. We sued the Trump administration just short of 100 times. I think it was 94 or 95 times. I wrote him 94 or 95 letters. He didn't respond. He just didn't respond. And, it's not like there were hard in those lawsuits. The Trump attacked the Affordable Care Act 6 or 8 different ways. I mean, we were involved in a number of different lawsuits protecting the Affordable Care Act. And I wrote to Larry Hogan each time, and he didn't take a position. There was one lawsuit when Trump tried to allow employers to deny health insurance for contraception. Larry Hogan said nothing. We sued Trump when he tried to allow insurance company to charge an additional premium for abortion care coverage. I wrote to Larry Hogan. He wouldn't respond. Uh, we we sued Trump when he tried to undermine access to family planning services for low-income people. Larry Hogan didn't want to get involved, said nothing. We sued Trump when he tried to roll back civil rights protections in healthcare, protections for LGBTQ individuals, and Larry Hogan wouldn't say boo. Same with his Muslim ban. Same with what I thought was the most disgraceful, dangerous, inhumane policy that the United States government has had in my lifetime, which was they were taking children away from parents when they crossed the border. And some of these children were infants and toddlers. They were taking them away from their parents. That's bad enough. We sued Trump over that policy. And of course, Larry Hogan didn't say boo.
Isn't he
But
legally required to work with the Attorney General or not?
he was required to respond to our letters.
Right.
Yes. And the Trump administration didn't even take the precaution of putting a little wristband around the kids' wrists so that they could reunite them with their parents. Some of them couldn't speak, for God's sake. There are still parents who don't know where their kids are. And Larry Hogan, he just ran from all of these issues 94, 95 times. They were really terrible environmental policies that we sued Trump over. The chemical accident safety rule said if you've got toxic chemicals, you got to let the first responders know, the firefighters and the medics, and you've got to let the neighbors know if there's a fire or a spill. What are they supposed to do? Trump tried to roll back that rule. Larry Hogan didn't want to get involved. So, I mean, in my view, he's too chicken to be a United States senator. As a senator, you got to vote yes or no. That's not Larry Hogan. He wants to hide under his desk.
So you also worked with Angela Alsobrooks, right?
I
Because
did.
how did you find her and her effectiveness?
Well, first, I worked with her when she was state's attorney for Prince George's County. And then I worked with her when she was the county executive of Prince George's County. So I have a great deal of experience working with her. And she's smart, she's articulate, she, she'll make tough calls. There are people in Prince George's who were angry at her. But because she had to make tough calls, but that's your job if you're a public official. She was a tough prosecutor. She and I probably am a little bit to her left on that kind of stuff. But on one important occasion, I was trying to get rid of money bail in Maryland, and we were ultimately successful. But she joined me. She was one of a handful of prosecutors who was willing to say, this is a broken system. It puts people in jail because they're poor. That's a tough call for a prosecutor. But John McCarthy was another, willing to do that. So I have a great deal of respect for her, a great deal of admiration as well.
So you obviously, it sounds like you strongly believe that Hogan should not get the Senate seat, that also Brooks should get the Senate seat. But
Yes,
Hogan
without question.
he says that he will be a moderating force and that he's above this politics. Why
That's laughable.
that's laughable. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Mitch McConnell is the guy who brought him in. Look, Larry Hogan, if he is elected, will vote for whomever succeeds Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader. And he will vote for Ted Cruz for a committee chair, Rand Paul for a committee chair, and a dozen other right-wing kooks who have seniority and are ready to take over all the committees in the US Senate and all of the subcommittees. That's who Larry Hogan will be voting for in his first acts as a United States Senator.
So, why in this particular year do you think it's most important to vote? Obviously, you're a Democrat for the Senate.
Well, I mean, I, I think there's a very good chance that Donald Trump is going to get elected president. Worst thing that could happen would be if he also had both houses of Congress. But every single vote in the United States Senate is going to be important. You can never count on Larry Hogan to vote with the Democrats. He hasn't done it in the past. I think he had a deathbed conversion on choice issues. You know, he all of a sudden this year, the first time in his life, says that he's pro-choice. I don't know what that means to him, but he has always been an opponent of any kind of abortion care in the past. And this year you're going to have, or next year, you're going to have a series of critical decisions made by Congress. If Donald Trump is the president, he's going to be appointing justices like Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, along with the three appointed last time. And the judges from all of the lower federal be going through the Senate, and Larry Hogan will be rubber stamping them for Donald if he gets elected.
And also if he adds to the Senate balance, then the Republicans get the head of every committee, right? Isn't that?
Absolutely. And it's a motley crew.
So there's also a couple of questions that are on the ballots, and I was wondering if you could speak with one. Question one, is the constitutional amendment the rights to reproductive freedom? Why do you think we
Yes.
need this on the ballot? Don't we get these rights?
Well, I mean, I think the Republicans, if they take control of the White House and the Congress, are going to be looking for a national abortion ban. You know, they're being very cagey about it right now, but that's what's going to happen. There is not a lot that we can do in Maryland that we haven't already done. We enshrined Roe versus Wade in the Maryland Code, but we can also put it in our Constitution. And I think that's really important. There's no telling what those guys are going to try. They're certainly going to try to stop people from leaving Republican states to have family planning, abortion care, contraceptive services and care elsewhere. They're going to be criminalizing the doctors. I think the more protection we can provide to people who are citizens here and people who are present here, the better off we'll be.
And so there's also a question A, which asks to reduce term limits for county executive.
Yeah.
3 consecutive terms to 2 consecutive terms. What is the background to that? I mean, we do have term limits, right?
We do. We already have. It's already part of the charter that terms for council and county executive are limited to 3. I think term limits are stupid. I mean, I was a better legislator every single day. I learned something every day I was in the General Assembly. And, you know, you start to see similar issues arise. You remember how they were handled in the past. You have a working memory of what the law is. And the longer you serve until you reach Donald Trump's senility, the more you improve. So, I mean, I really think term limits are stupid. But in this case, they're a little more pernicious than that. The folks behind the term limit proposition are developers. They're the same folks who are behind the change and proposed change in the zoning here. And, you know, whatever your position is on that, it's fine. But I just don't think they should be driving the train. So I'm against it. I mean, I don't think, I think 2 terms is good for a county executive. After that, it's debatable. But in these circumstances, I just think we just adopted in effect, a constitutional change, I think in 2018, and there's no need to do it now, unless you want to make sure Mark Elrich is not county executive again. And I don't think that should be driving a constitutional amendment.
And that's what you feel the impetus around this question is.
I do.
Okay, yeah. All right. Well, I know I promised you it wouldn't be too long. So, but is there anything else you'd like to add to the discussion, Brian, that you think that voters might want to know, Maryland voters might want to know, or US voters might want to know?
I think the folks who are on this call probably know more than I do. But I mean, if somebody has questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask a question, you can unmute, I guess, and ask Brian.
This is Nat. First of all, Brian, let's give credit where credit's due. Esther, who was well trained by me, did a lot of the work on
Oh,
this.
she's sitting. I didn't know she was on. Yes, Esther is the one who she did a title search that showed us exactly what happened with Larry Hogan.
But one thing that if somebody asks you the question, I did real estate in both Maryland and DC. If that deed had been properly done, she would have automatically lost that exemption, because what happens when you go to closing, they give you a form. We used to file the forms, and then DC got so famished that we stopped doing it. But you give it to the person, you tell them they have to file it, and then they get the homestead exemption. So the fact that it was done improperly is important, because DC would have automatically dropped her.
Yeah, and she had no way of knowing, like
Right.
you said.
And the other thing is with this in Maryland, and I'll give Esther a lot of credit for this, you explain to the client, are you in fact a first-time buyer? And if you are a first-time buyer, we'll check off this. Probably what happened with her, and I haven't seen the files, but somebody went to her house, they said, here, sign here, sign here, sign here. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist, but people don't know this. The other thing I'm concerned about, Brian, is these accusations that she was dropping security at schools, and these police officers are saying, and then the other ad, which is good, is saying, no, absolutely not, that she was very supportive. But I'm concerned that the ads for her need to be a little stronger than they are.
Yeah,
And that's all I have.
Yeah, I mean, crime, when she was state's attorney, crime went down significantly. It dropped by 50%. And I think it may have gone up again, not as much, but up some when she became county executive, when she had less control over it. But as I said, when you're county executive, you have to bargain with the state police, you have to bargain with the teachers, and you never are able, you can't give them as much as they want, you can't give them as much as they deserve, because in Prince George's County, taxes are capped thanks to Larry Hogan and Larry Hogan Sr. And the police are mad at her for that, and the teachers they're back behind her, but you can't pay the county employees enough. They're underpaid, and any responsible executive has to balance the budget.
Hey, Brian, it's Barry Gottfried. I already voted for it, and my ballot was counted, so it doesn't matter. But man, there's a sloppy staff work, Brian. Somebody should have found that tax thing before the op research found it. And all
Yes,
those ads drive me crazy. And I hope somebody's head rolled.
Well, I mean, truthfully, she should not have her staff doing that. Her campaign staff should have done that. They should have done opposition research on her, and they should have found it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Hey, Brian, I'd gotten an email from you in support of Shebra Evans for school board. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, she has served for 2 terms. She's been president of the board. She's been an officer in the statewide organization of school boards. She's very competent. She's quite smart. She's done a very good job. And this is a situation in which the teachers are opposed to her because she's an incumbent and because they didn't get everything they wanted. I mean, listen, the teachers always supported me, and I love and respect them, but I think they're wrong on this. She deserves to be reelected.
Any other questions for Brian? I guess we're good. Well, you know,
You know, I was saying about voting for, a lot of people are saying, well, I voted for Trump, Trump, it's hard to get them mixed up, Hogan for governor. I remember back when Connie Morello was our representative and the Democrats controlled the House. And so I, as a diehard Democrat, used to vote for her because she was doing a lot for the employees and whatever. Newt Gingrich ended all of that. And that's what I think is important to keep in mind, because when if they control the Senate and he's on it, it's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, you know, I mean, they've purged all the moderates. I mean, Larry Hogan claims he's a moderate because he's a Reagan Republican. I mean, where I come from, that's not a moderate. And he's not really, he's a little to the right of Ronald Reagan in many respects, or at least he has abetted and abided Republican policies that I don't think even Ronald Reagan would have stood for.
Anybody else have any questions?
Comments, threats, insults, whatever.
Or kudos. Thank you so much, Brian. I mean, this was great, and we'll try and put this up on YouTube. So if you know anybody who, you know, may have not been able to attend, we can get it out to them. So I want to thank you, Brian. And I really want to also thank Kathy Hill and Suzanne Nash for helping us organize this as well. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you,
See you
Jill.
at the polls, right?
Yep.
All right. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Jill.